I'm doing a reading wrap-up of everything that I read in January, and I'll be talking about these in the order of publication date, which coincidentally is roughly in preference order. At least it leads up to my favorite book of the month. And before I begin, I want to preface with a note about my reading goals for 2018. I do want to continue reading a lot of female and POC authors, and I have this new goal this year where I want to get around to the books on my TBR that have been there for years. I actually want to seriously tackle that TBR. So I really love reading science fiction and fantasy. I love books from the 1800s, and I like a lot of more contemporary genre works, so published 1980 onwards roughly, and thus my least comprehensive coverage is publication between 1900 and 1980. So this month I picked some authors that are new to me who were publishing in the 50s. So first published in 1953 is The Long Goodbye by Raymond Chandler, and this is a Philip Marlowe novel. It's a classic hard-boiled detective in LA noir setting, and Marlowe befriends this guy Terry Leno, who is divorced from his wife, then remarries her, then wife ends up dead, and Leno ends up on the lam. Marlowe is still in LA, and subsequently he has the cops and gangsters and a new sort of client on his case. So this is my first Raymond Chandler book, and I really enjoyed his writing style. It's very distinct and it's very lean. There's not a word wasted, so I really love this writing style, but I didn't enjoy the main character. Marlowe the PI, he is so frustratingly stubborn for very poor reasons. So while I enjoyed the writing style, I wouldn't want to continue on with Philip Marlowe books because the character is really frustrating for me. Moving along, I read some of James Baldwin's works, which I hadn't read any of before. First, I read Giovanni's Room, which was published in 1956, and this is a classic of gay literature. It reminds me very much of F. Scott Fitzgerald's writings. It seems to be very similar to a lot of, at least the books that I studied when I was in school, and it just feels very 20th century. In this book, David, who is an American expat living in Paris, he proposes to a young woman, and while she's away, David meets Giovanni. And Giovanni is a sexy, tortured soul. David moves in with Giovanni, and they carry on a lengthy affair. And this is all while David is being pretty tortured by his oscillating sexual identity. This is a powerful and painful story to read. It deals with huge themes of sex and love and lust and death. And though very painful, I really appreciated this story, and I'm really glad that I got around to it. I read another of James Baldwin's works, which is The Fire Next Time. This one was published in 1963, and it's nonfiction essays. They are in the form of 2 letters written on the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation. And these are such good pieces. They address the nation on racial injustice, and it's very personal. Like, I appreciated the personal parts where, for instance, Baldwin talks about his early life in Harlem. So Baldwin, he was a powerful voice of the civil rights era, and this book is just as relevant today. Seriously, everyone right now should read this perspective on race relations and its call for us to better understand each other. Now, moving to 1998, I read De Colores Means All of Us. It's by Elizabeth Martinez. This book talks about the history and politics of race, gender, and civil rights in the US. It's told through the lens of social justice activism. The author is a Latina who has over 30 years of experience in liberal movements. And the book, though primarily a history, has a really strong message. It advocates for an intersectional movement of marginalized groups working together rather than apart. And this book is really excellent material that I enjoyed. Moving along to some fantasy books, I read First Test and Page by Tamora Pierce, which were published in 1999 and 2000. I hadn't really expected to be back on the Total Universe reread so soon, but here I am. These books are the first 2 in the Protector of the Small series. So in this, we're in the medieval and fantastic realm of Total, and at the beginning of these books, it's been fairly recently that the Crown has decreed that girls are allowed to train for knighthood, and Caladri is the first girl to step forward. But the training master is a bit of a prick. While he has to allow Cal to train, he puts her on probation. That's just such a dick move. But our amazing Kel, she is up to the task and she works hard to prove herself to the training master. And so far, it's just really awesome. I recall the series the least, and it's really awesome to refamiliarize myself with it, and I'm really enjoying being in the world of Tortal again. Moving along to another reread, it's The 100,000 Kingdoms by Jemisin, which was published in 2010, and this book is the first in the Inheritance trilogy. I had only gone through the first book, and I want to read the whole trilogy this year, so I'm going back to read this book again. This world is really cool for being a fantasy world that's not based on medieval Europe, so it's pretty unique and great. And this world in itself, it has a really rich mythology. There are some enslaved gods living among mortals, and among this world, Yene is summoned to the capital of the world, and she's made an heir in this deadly competition for the throne. Yene herself, she is brashly brave, but under pressure, she's not the smartest, which makes her a little bit incompetent. And as a character, she's too selfless and self-sacrificial for my taste. So while I don't enjoy the main character, I do really love this world, the incredible mythology, and the other memorable characters, particularly amongst the set of gods. There are some great characters that really make up this rich world and make the story really great to read. So I did read the second book in the Inheritance trilogy, which is The Broken Kingdoms, again by Jemisin, and published actually later in 2010. Our main character is Ori. She's a blind artist living alone, and then she finds a man in a muck bin outside, so she takes him in, and he's an odd one. He is not quite mortal and not quite a godling. And then in the plot of what's happening in the greater city, someone is murdering godlings. Now, with Ori, I have realized more complete thoughts about my feelings about Yene. So we have these two main characters in the series, one for each of the two books I've read in the trilogy, and these heroines tend to fall apart in the face of adversity. When faced with something tough, they turn fairly dumb and incompetent, so that they end up as the victims of the circumstances around them. And when they do anything well, it is because it has been forced out of them by other people around them. And so I was thinking that, oh look, they're selfless, but also they have a disturbing lack of self-preservation. There's a pattern. These two main characters, when faced with adversity, their first response is to embrace their own death, which is crazy because they act like their own sacrifice is the first and best response to any situation. And so I find that weird and disturbing. But overall, it's interesting that I actually really like these books. The world is so incredible. I love this world, and the mythology and the secondary characters, all amazing and memorable, and make this so that I actually am overall enjoying the series despite the my weird relationship of how I perceive the main characters. Moving along, I read Crazy Rich Asians by Kwan, published in 2013, and this is a contemporary book that I heard is very humorous. In fact, I heard someone say that this was the funniest thing that she had read all of last year, and the whole trilogy is out, so I thought I'd give this book a shot. It's set in the world of the Asian jet set. It focuses on three super rich, crazily pedigreed Chinese families, and it starts with one of the heirs of this massive fortune bringing home his American-born Chinese girlfriend to Singapore to the wedding of the season and into the world of the crazy rich. And this book left me reeling. The ungodly opulence and snappy satire and breakneck pace of this book made for a very mesmerizing page-turning experience. And while it left me feeling a little squicky because I don't like that opulence, I think I could actually really just, in good faith recommend this book. It is well written, it's funny, I've heard the whole trilogy is great, and so I think I'd recommend this for others even if I'm not personally continuing on with this trilogy. Another book I read from 2013 is The Shambling Guide to New York City by Lafferty. And it's an urban fantasy, it's got paranormal in it, and I am not usually a fan of urban fantasy, but I loved Lafferty's space mystery, Six Wakes, and so I wanted to give another of her books a try. In this, the main character gets a job writing a travel guide to New York City for the undead. And this book is a madcap romp that is so very campy. It's really great if you're in the mood for a popcorn sort of read. Otherwise, I'd pass on it. Moving along, I read An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, which was published in 2015. And this is actually the first book I read this month, and it was a really great way to start the year. It's a young adult fantasy novel and set in the Martial Empire. It has two main characters. One is a girl turned slave who's trying to save her brother, and the other is a military student, and he's trying to escape his life of violence. And the book has a slow start. I didn't know if I was going to really get into it because it's very dark, like torturously dark, and there are a fair number of YA tropes. But as the book goes along, it subverts a lot of tropes in interesting ways, and then the plot caught me. Like, that plot did me in, and I just raced through the pages once it really got going, and there were surprises that I would have never predicted. And then alongside, as the plot picked up, the character development also did, and so that was another element that really shone in the book. And so I really recommend this book for its stellar plot that I did not see coming. Now, this next book is The Mothers by Brit Bennett, published in 2016, and it was possibly the greatest literary fiction hit of 2016. So it'd been on my TBR for almost a couple of years, and I'm really appreciative that I finally got around to it because it's just such a great story. This is set in a contemporary Black community in Southern California. Nadia, 17 years old, she is mourning her mother's suicide and also starts seeing the local pastor's son, Luke, who is a former college football star whose injury took him out of the game very recently. And Nadia and Luke's choices and the subsequent cover-up that affects their lives and the lives of those closest to them for years to come. The writing of this book is so accessible. I fell into the story with no effort at all, which is very odd for a literary fiction book for me, and it is just really so sad and so beautiful. And so it's been a while since a lit fic book has surprised me so pleasantly. I just really deeply appreciated this just beautiful and accessible story. This month I also read Ironclads by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and this was published in 2017. It's a military sci-fi novella, and the author also wrote the popular Children of Time, so that's an excellent work and where you might have heard this author's name before. In Ironclads, we have this world where the rich go to war in these war machines that are the best things money can buy, and then the rest of us schmucks, we become disposable soldiers in war. When one of the Richie Riches goes missing on the Nord front, which should be impossible, but anyway, Sergeant Ted Reagan and his men are sent on this special ops mission to go find that missing bastard. So what I really like about this little book is that it has strong social themes, and it has a really strong narrative for a work that's only novella length, and so it's a really solid work. And we have made it to my favorite read of the month. It is Djinn City by Saad Hossain. It was published in 2017, and this book is set in Bangladesh. Indilbed is a lonely kid, and he's not allowed to go to school. He spends his days in a crumbling mansion, living with his drunk father, who is the black sheep of their family clan. Then suddenly, Indilbed and his visiting cousin find Indilbed's dad in a supernatural coma. And then Indilbed is kidnapped by some Djinn. So first the boys are like, what, there are Djinn? They exist? And then second, oh shit, we are in the middle of a Djinn controversy, which is tied to the fallout of an ancient war, and there's now impending catastrophe. I absolutely love this book. It is a great world with this amazing plot, with twists that absolutely delighted me, and it's got great writing. It's a solid page-turner of a book, so I just thoroughly enjoyed it, though I must give a warning that this book does end on a major cliffhanger. So if that kind of thing bothers you, I'd say try to wait it out. There's no sequel in sight as of yet, but we'll see. If you're okay with the fact that there's a cliffhanger and no sequel, I'd say go for it. It's an absolutely wonderful book, so read it and then talk to me about it because I really loved it. But anyway, Those are all the books that I read this month. So till next time, my lovelies.